August 21st, 1942. 1:30 in the morning. The darkness along Guadalcanal's northern coast pressed thick and humid against the skin, carrying the weight of tropical rain soon to fall. Colonel Kaineo Ichiki crouched among the palms east of Alligator Creek, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves against sand, the rustle of equipment from 800 men behind him, the whisper of destiny calling. Through the coconut grove ahead, the beach lay pale under starlight, empty, it seemed, as the scouts had reported. The American Marines who had landed 2 weeks earlier were somewhere beyond that narrow sandbar, disorganized and few in number according to intelligence from Rabaul. Ichiki had written in his journal just 3 days before, August 18th, landing, August 20th, march by night in battle, August 21st, enjoyment of the fruit of victory. His men, elite veterans of campaigns in China and Malaya, gripped their Arisaka rifles with the confidence of warriors who had never known defeat. The creek before them, misnamed Tenaru by the American, would be crossed in minutes. Henderson Field would fall by dawn. The rising sun would reclaim what the enemy had briefly stolen. But the beach was not empty. Behind that thin line of vegetation, 11,000 United States Marines waited in prepared positions with machine guns, artillery, and anti-tank weapons that would soon transform this quiet stretch of sand into what one Japanese admiral would later call a demonstration of the hopelessness of bamboo spear tactic. What Ichiki and his men were about to encounter was not simply a military force. It was a leading edge of American industrial democracy mobilized for total war, a system that could project overwhelming firepower across 8,000 miles of ocean and sustain it indefinitely. The scouts had been wrong. The sea was about to open with American steel. The story of this night begins not on Guadalcanal, but in the fundamental miscalculation that had shaped Japanese strategy since before Pearl Harbor. The Imperial General Headquarters had studied America and concluded that its democratic system was a fatal weakness, that a nation devoted to individual comfort and commercial prosperity could never match the spiritual strength of warriors serving the emperor. Victory after victory throughout 1941 and early 1942 had seemed to confirm this judgment. The Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, everywhere the Japanese army advanced, Western colonial forces collapsed or surrendered. When American Marines landed on Guadalcanal on August 7, 1942, Japanese commanders initially believed it was merely a raid, a desperate gesture from a nation that would soon sue for peace rather than endure prolonged conflict. An aerial reconnaissance flight over Marine positions on August 12 had spotted few troops in the open and no large ships nearby, convincing Imperial headquarters that the Allies had already withdrawn most of their forces. The reality was that not a single Marine had been withdrawn. They were simply taking cover from air attack and digging in along a defensive perimeter. But this misperception fit comfortably within the Japanese worldview. At the major naval base at Truk, Colonel Ichiki was briefed that between 2,000 and 10,000 American troops were defending Guadalcanal and that he should avoid frontal attacks. Ichiki, supremely confident in his men's superiority, decided that 900 elite soldiers would be more than sufficient to destroy whatever demoralized garrison remained. He would attack immediately before the rest of his regiment even arrived. This was victory disease, the overconfidence born of unbroken success. The Ichiki detachment had been battle-tested and decorated. They were samurai in spirit if not in name, men who had been taught that one Japanese soldier equaled 10 soft Westerners. They carried 7 days of food and the absolute certainty that Bushido, the way of the warrior, would overcome any material disadvantage. As they moved through the darkness toward the sandbar at the mouth of Alligator Creek, they expected to meet frightened conscripts, perhaps men recruited from prisons, certainly troops lacking the discipline and willingness to die that defined the Japanese military. What they did not expect, what they could not have imagined, was the sound. At 0130 hours, as the first wave of approximately 100 Japanese soldiers charged across the narrow sandbar with bayonets fixed and war cries rising, the American line erupted. Machine guns opened fire from positions the attackers had not seen, could not have seen in the darkness. The 37mm anti-tank guns fired canister shot, essentially enormous shotgun shells that turned human bodies into fragments. The distinctive crack of M1 Garand rifles added their voice, each Marine able to fire 8 rounds as fast as he could pull the trigger without manually working a bolt. Behind the lines, Marine artillery, 32 howitzers of 75mm and 105mm caliber that had been landed despite the chaos of the initial assault, began dropping shells with devastating accuracy onto the eastern bank of the creek. The sound was not the clash of warriors meeting in honorable combat. It was the roar of an industrial system that could manufacture, transport, and deliver overwhelming firepower to the remotest corner of the Pacific. Each artillery shell that crashed into the Japanese positions represented not just explosive power, but a supply chain that stretched back across thousands of miles of ocean to factories in America, where workers, many of them women who had never held industrial jobs before Pearl Harbor, labored in 3 shifts to produce the munitions of war. The machine gun ammunition had been packed and shipped by teenagers working after-school jobs. The sea rations the Marines had eaten that evening had been canned by civilians who would never see combat, but understood they were part of something larger than themselves. Most of the first Japanese wave died on that sandbar. A few reached the Marine positions and engaged in savage hand-to-hand combat, capturing several forward emplacements before a reserve company counterattacked and killed them. At 0230 hours, a second wave of 150 to 200 Japanese troops charged across the same sandbar into the same wall of fire and was virtually annihilated. Officers who survived long enough to report back to Ichiki urged him to withdraw. He refused. The concept of withdrawal was alien to a man who had written of enjoying the fruit of victory just hours before the attack began. Around 0500 hours, a third wave attempted to flank the Marine positions by wading through the ocean surf and attacking along the beach. Marine machine guns repositioned to cover the waterline. Artillery shells walked along the surf zone. The attack collapsed. For the next 2 hours, the two forces exchanged fire across the creek at close range, Japanese mortars and machine guns against American artillery and automatic weapons. The fundamental asymmetry was already clear. The Japanese were fighting with the weapons they carried on their backs, while the Americans were connected by field telephone and radio to supporting units that could bring down fire from howitzers, mortars, and even naval vessels offshore if needed. As dawn broke over Guadalcanal, the Marines counterattacked. The 1st Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, under Lieutenant Colonel Leonard B. Cresswell, crossed Alligator Creek upstream from the battle area and moved to envelop Ichiki's force from the south and east, cutting off any retreat. Aircraft from Henderson Field, the very airfield Ichiki had planned to recapture, strafed Japanese soldiers attempting to flee along the beach. In the afternoon, 4 or 5 M3 Stuart light tanks crossed the sandbar and swept through the coconut grove where the surviving Japanese had taken refuge. The tanks, each weighing 12 tons and armed with a 37mm cannon plus machine guns, rolled over bodies both living and dead. Major General Alexander Vandegrift, commanding the 1st Marine Division, would later write that the rear of the tanks looked like meat grinders. By 1700 hours on August 21st, organized Japanese resistance had ended. Of the 917 men in Ichiki's first element, approximately 800 were dead. The Marines had suffered 34 killed in action and 75 wounded. Colonel Ichiki, facing the unthinkable reality of total defeat, committed seppuku after burning his regimental colors. About 30 Japanese soldiers escaped to rejoin their regiment's rear echelon at Taivu Point, where they would radio to Rabaul that Ichiki's detachment had been almost annihilated at a point shore of the airfield. But the Battle of Tenaru was more than a tactical defeat. It was the shattering of an ideology. The sound of American artillery, that mechanical thunder that had dominated the battle from beginning to end, became the recurring nightmare of every Japanese soldier who fought on Guadalcanal over the next 6 months. It was not merely the sound of explosions. It was the sound of abundance, of a nation that could produce munitions faster than they could be expended, that could deliver hot meals and ice cream to troops fighting in malarial jungles 8,000 miles from home, that could replace every loss and multiply its strength while the Japanese garrison slowly starved. The transformation in Japanese perception began immediately. Rear Admiral Reizo Tanaka, whose destroyer force would later deliver reinforcements to Guadalcanal, reflected that Ichiki's attack was sheer folly and that this tragedy should have taught us the hopelessness of bamboo's spear tactic. But the lesson was slow to penetrate the command structure. Japanese headquarters, receiving the initial reports of disaster, reacted with disbelief. How could elite troops have been so thoroughly destroyed? Imperial Army officers clung to optimism, attributing the defeat to bad luck or poor execution rather than fundamental strategic error. It would take months of grinding attrition before senior commanders truly grasped what Guadalcanal represented. Not a battle between armies, but a contest between industrial systems, one that Japan was losing catastrophically. For the Marines on Guadalcanal, the psychological impact was equally profound but in the opposite direction. After months of defeats across the Pacific, after watching the Japanese military machine roll Over every force that stood against it, American soldiers now knew they could win. General Van de Grift wrote to Marine Commandant Lieutenant General Thomas Holcomb, "These youngsters are the darndest people when they get started you ever saw." The Marines, who had been trigger-happy in their first days ashore, shooting at shadows, were now confident, patrolling with enthusiasm, waiting for real targets. The myth of Japanese invincibility, of a Superman warrior who could prevail through spiritual strength alone, had died with the Cheeky's regiment on that sandbar. But beyond morale and tactics, the Battle of Teneru revealed a truth that would define the Pacific War. American logistics were faster, more efficient, and more effective than their Japanese counterpart. While both navies adopted similar strategies of using fast destroyers to deliver troops and supplies under cover of darkness, the Japanese Tokyo Express and the American APD destroyed transports. The Americans incorporated organic landing craft into their ships, allowing them to complete the crucial last stage of delivery, actually getting supplies ashore. Japanese destroyers lacked this capability, forcing them to use small boats and barrels floated to the surf, with wastage rates as high as 70%. American logisticians also established air transport using Marine R-4D aircraft within 2 weeks of landing, capable of delivering aviation fuel and evacuating wounded, an option the Japanese never matched after losing Henderson Field. The sound of American artillery that had dominated the Battle of Teneru became the soundtrack of Guadalcanal. Day after day, night after night, Marine howitzers fired in support of every defensive action, every patrol, every counterattack. Each barrage represented President Franklin Roosevelt's vision of America as an arsenal of democracy, a nation that could transform its peacetime economy into a war production machine of unprecedented scale. By the time of Guadalcanal, the United States had already increased its military from 458,365 personnel in 1939 to over 3.8 million in 1942. American factories that had produced 3,600 military aircraft in 1939 would produce 47,800 in 1942 alone. Sourced from prior draft research, the industrial capacity that Japanese planners had dismissed as soft and commercially focused proved to be the decisive weapon of the war. The Marines who walked the battlefield after the fighting ended found more than dead bodies. They found diaries and letters that revealed the depth of Japanese miscalculation. These soldiers had expected to fight an enemy weakened by democracy, softened by prosperity, lacking warrior spirit. Instead, they had encountered a different kind of strength, the strength of a free people who had chosen to fight, who were backed by an entire society mobilized for war, while maintaining its essential democratic character. The same postal service that delivered mail to families in Iowa delivered letters to Marines on Guadalcanal. The same system that manufactured automobiles in Detroit now produced tanks, half-tracks, and artillery pieces in quantities that Japanese commanders watching from the jungle simply could not believe. Throughout the remaining months of the Guadalcanal campaign, the pattern established at Teneru repeated with variations. In September, General Kyoto Kawaguchi attacked with a full brigade and was defeated at Edson's Ridge. In October, Lieutenant General Harakichi Hakutake led an even larger assault and was repulsed with devastating losses. Each time, Japanese courage and tactical skill proved insufficient against American firepower and logistics. Japanese soldiers, reduced to eating grass and bark, watched as Americans casually discarded half-eaten rations that contained more calories than an imperial soldier might see in a week. The spiritual strength that was supposed to overcome material disadvantage meant nothing when facing bombardment from naval vessels, precision bombing from aircraft, and artillery that could deliver fire day and night without cease. By the time Japan evacuated its surviving forces from Guadalcanal in February 1943, over 19,000 Japanese soldiers had died on the island, most from disease and starvation, while American deaths numbered fewer than 2,000. The psychological transformation was complete. One Japanese officer, General Kawaguchi, would later tell a reporter in Manila, "We lost the battle, and Japan lost the war." The arsenal of democracy had proven that free societies, when defending their freedom, could generate power beyond the imagination of authoritarian empires. The sound of American artillery echoing across Guadalcanal in August 1942 was a sound of fundamental truth being demonstrated under fire. Democracy had been dismissed by Japanese military thinkers as weak, as incapable of the unity and sacrifice required for modern war. But Roosevelt's arsenal of democracy revealed the opposite, that free people, choosing voluntarily to contribute to a common cause, could mobilize resources on a scale that surpassed any totalitarian system. The factory worker in Detroit and the Marine on Guadalcanal were both components of the same democratic enterprise. The teenager packing ammunition in Pennsylvania and the artillery observer calling in fire coordinates on the Tenerife were parts of a single vast mechanism powered not by compulsion, but by shared commitment to freedom. The Japanese scouts had been wrong about more than just the number of troops defending that beach. They had been wrong about the fundamental nature of American society. The beach was never empty. It was defended by the full weight of industrial democracy, by a nation that could produce munitions and equipment faster than any enemy could destroy them, by a people who understood that their individual freedom depended on collective action. When the sea opened with American steel that night, it was not merely machine guns and artillery firing. It was a sound of free people announcing that they would not yield, that they possessed resources both material and spiritual that no empire could match. The Tenerife River flows quietly today, its waters clear, its banks overgrown with jungle vegetation. Visitors to the battlefield sometimes claim they can still hear echoes of that August night, the roar of artillery, the chatter of machine guns, the grinding of tank treads. But the true echo is not a sound, but a lesson written in blood and steel along that sandbar, that democratic societies, when roused to defend their freedoms, generate power that transcends mere industrial capacity. The sound of American guns at Guadalcanal was the sound of factory workers, farmers, students, and soldiers united in common purpose. It was the sound of the four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear, defended by citizens who understood their value. It was a sound of abundance backed by democratic ideals, of material prosperity placed in service of human liberty, of a free people demonstrating that when freedom itself is threatened, they will organize, produce, and prevail against any tyranny that stand against them. Colonel Achiki's journal entry promising enjoyment of victory's fruit remains as testimony to how completely the Japanese military had misunderstood their enemy. The empty beach was an illusion, like so many assumptions about American weakness and democratic fragility. Behind that beach stood not just Marines, but an entire civilization mobilized for war, one that could deliver ice cream to tropical islands while Japanese soldiers starved, that could replace losses faster than enemies could inflict them, that could sustain years of brutal combat, while maintaining the essential freedoms that defined its national character. The sea opened with American steel that night on Guadalcanal, and in doing so announced to the world that democracy, when defending itself, possesses strengths that no amount of warrior spirit or totalitarian discipline can overcome. The sound of those guns would echo across the Pacific for the next 3 years, growing louder with each island recaptured, each position overrun, until finally it became the sound of atomic weapons over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the ultimate demonstration of what the arsenal of democracy could produce when pushed to its absolute limits. But the fundamental truth was established on that August night in 1942. Freedom, when armed and resolved, cannot be conquered by those who mistake democracy for weakness.